Hello, welcome to the inaugural Sneakers and Cleats podcast, where a couple times a week we take on some big topics, mainly the Spurs and the savior, Victor Wembanyama, the Dallas Cowboys, but we will have one podcast per week dedicated to San Antonio high school athletics. That is a promise I'm going to make to you. The episode today, it's our draft preview, a deep dive into what drafting Wemby means for the Spurs, and I don't think it can be overstated that it means a whole heck of a lot. Some housekeeping to get to first, though. Now, this is a brand new podcast, so it has some ups and it has some downs. It has some goods and some bads. The good, it's new. We can do what we want, format it how we want, play around with it, kind of see what works and see what doesn't. The bad is there's going to be some trial and error. We're going to do some things, try some things that work, some that don't. We're just going to roll with the punches. We're asking you guys to roll along with us. Give us your feedback too. You should be able to get this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So go on there, subscribe, rate, review, unsubscribe, and then resubscribe, re-rate, re-review. Give us a 5-star rating. Leave some feedback, whether it's positive or negative. We want to hear from you what's working and what's not working. As my fellow podcaster, Chad Millman, says, one of the podcasts I listen to all the time, feedback is a gift. So whether it's positive or negative, send it our way. Maybe we'll read some on the podcast at the end. And try not to make it too negative, though. Don't be mean. So I'm Matt Roy. I got my sports journalism degree at ASU and have been working ever since. Been here in San Antonio for about a year and a half. But makes my job easier is having two legends alongside me. Preeminent voices of San Antonio sports for a long, long time now, guys.
I don't know about that, Matt. For you, maybe, from Springfield. The rest of these people listening are sick of us already.
Haven't caught on to us yet.
I mean, the jig's not up yet. So, Don Harris is the first voice you heard. Chuck McKinnick, the second voice you heard. Don, why don't you give us a little intro, give the people a little bit of insight into who you are.
Well, I grew up here from San Antonio. Chuck and I were rivals in high school. We didn't know each other, but our two high schools were. We're both from NEISD schools. I went to Churchill and University of North Texas, where I was in the Mercer Mafia, the legendary sports broadcasting school with guys like Craig Way and Dave Barnett and on and on and on. And started here, actually in television. I started in radio in Dallas, but started here in 1988. Have been here ever since and been the joy of my life to cover my hometown team and hometown being able to stay at home.
Been able to do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of finals to cover.
A lot of finals, a lot of Super Bowls, and we don't want to talk about when because that would make us sound way too old. The other day I texted David Robinson because it was the anniversary of the 20th anniversary of his last game. And when you think about that, not his first game, his last game. David Robinson has been retired for 20 years. That made me feel old, so I wanted him to feel just as old.
You want to know how old I was when that day happened?
When he retired?
Yeah, when he retired.
Were you born?
I was born. What was that, 2003? June 15, 2003?
Yeah.
I was 8.
8, yeah.
If that doesn't make you guys feel old, I don't know what does.
Which means you weren't born when he was drafted.
No, I was not. I wasn't even a thought when he was
Chuck
drafted.
and I started working here in the David Robinson days.
So what, 34 years, 33 years?
33 years at Channel 4.
All right.
Yeah.
Chuck?
Yeah, similar story. I mean, I was a military kid, so I went here to high school at Madison High School for 2 years, my junior and senior year. Went out of state for a year, a small school in Wisconsin. Loved it, but it was tough playing baseball and going to school at the same time. Baseball part was fun, school and baseball at the same time. I had to make a judicial decision. You're not good enough to do anything other than do where you're at right now. So transferred to Texas State, got my first job in Laredo, Texas in late 88. Worked at another TV station here in town. What year was that? Late 80s. I'm not really sure the exact time, but was there for 3 years and then came over to Fox for the summer of 95 and been here ever since. Yep. I mean,
came with the building.
Pretty much. Alex beat me here by 6 months, but we're one of the few guys that started at the very beginning.
When did they start doing news at Fox?
It was May or March
Of
of 95. And I came over here late July or early August.
Is that when they got
I still wasn't born yet.
Fox was kind of born when
they got NFL.
NFC went to Fox?
Mm-hmm.
I remember being at that Super Bowl when they announced that it was going to go there. But I don't remember thinking at the time how much difference that would make for the San Antonio market as far as launching a news organization.
Well, I don't think a lot of people knew that the way things are now. I mean, right then we thought we were week to week. We didn't know if we were going to be around for a week, a month, a year. And so
28 years later, here you are.
Right. The approach was literally win the day, because if you don't, you may not be here tomorrow.
And I remember thinking, God, those guys have really screwed up NFL football, because they put this thing up on the upper left-hand corner with both teams' names and the score and the time. And that had never been done before. And now we couldn't watch a game without knowing what the score and time is.
Absolutely.
I work at a CBS station, so, they lose the NFC package, and I'm thinking, I never even heard of Fox. Like, what's going to, are we going to be able to find games? So, yeah, it's kind of funny how it all turned out.
Now they've hosted Super Bowls and gave birth to Joe Buck and all these things, and here we are. So we gather here today on this wonderful day before the draft to talk about the savior of San Antonio. Right, Don?
Well, possibly.
Possibly the savior of San Antonio.
The potential savior of the Spurs, for sure.
So Victor Wembanyama, 19-year-old phenom out of France. He's 7'5" and basically plays like Steph Curry. And plus Nikola Jokic, plus James Harden, plus any other superstar.
I think Giannis and KD are the two comparisons that I think are most
both
appropriate.
big, skinny guys.
Yeah. Well, I think when he adds some weight and his shooting ability and his handles, I don't think he'll ever be Steph Curry with his handles, but he's going to have the ability to shoot over anybody. And the fact that he's mobile enough to get to a spot to shoot over anybody is what I think intrigues scouts. The fact that he can handle it, I think the expectations have to be realistic, because he's going to get pushed around a little bit, especially if they play him in the post. But, again, potentially, nobody's ever seen anything like this.
Have you ever seen anything like this, Joe?
No, and it is funny how things kind of come full circle. I remember when LeBron came into the league, and very early on, the Spurs just so happened to be on the CW when we were doing a game down there. I'd never seen this kid. I never saw a frame of video of this guy. You heard about the hype, but it was all from NBA circles of people that were, that followed this guy's trajectory, or when he started getting on the radar. And I just remember before the game, it's like, Mike Kickarilla, the producer, it's like, okay, we're going to do a lot on this talent that we haven't seen. And I was like, dang, really? We're going to do this? We're going to start hyping this guy? And Sean Elliott's like, man, I'm with you until I've seen streams of video of this guy recently, and the frame at his age, he goes, I have a feeling the hype train is going to be right on this one. And he was dead on. Spot on.
It seems like
with LeBron. And so it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Different frames, obviously. And, with big guys, you're always worried about injuries and how are they going to hold up over the course of a career. But because he's 19 years old, Shaq wasn't always the wide guy, when he was that age. He got pretty thick pretty quick. But, some of these guys, because of their age, they're not done growing. They may be done growing in terms of North and South, but East and West, who's to say with the right nutrition and the right people around him? You can't spread this guy out East and West. And then what is that going to look like? If you can put 30 pounds of girth on this guy and it fits his frame well, now everything that we've seen,
Right.
I mean, it really is something to think what you might have in this guy.
And the injury thing is a real concern. You see Chet Holmgren, the skinny kid that came out of Gonzaga this year, got the foot fracture and he was out all year. So, I mean, those skinny framed guys don't tend to hold up well, especially in the beginning when they're getting banged around by people who look like Zion, even though he can't stay on the field.
I think I was talking to Mike Finger about this the other day of the Express News. True, that seems to be an impression because of guys like Chet Holmgren, Bill Walton had foot problems. But when you start thinking about the 7'4", 7'5" guys, and you go back and look at their careers, these guys played, like Sean Bradley played 10 years. Mark Eaton played 12 years. It's not always the fact that a big guy like this has foot problems. And, it's obviously, that it could be a fear. You look at Sam Bowie, he had stress fractures. Certainly possible. But there's been a lot of guys 7'2", 7'3", and taller who had good long careers. They didn't move like this guy. And the other thing to consider is this guy has kind of been created in a lab from the time he was 9 years old. From the time he was 13 years old, he's been doing feet training, strength and conditioning exercises on his toes daily. They know that this is a possibility. I've seen crazy videos of this guy clawing his way across a wooden floor with his toes to work on his feet. And so everything with his team of trainers and has been thought of. Now, it doesn't prevent it from happening, but I think it's a little bit misleading to say just because he's tall, we should be afraid that he's going to have all these injuries.
That's fair. The symmetry of everything is kind of interesting. You heard Chuck say LeBron. It seems like every 20 years there's someone that changes the game, that takes over the league, and it seems to be Wemby's this one. 20 years ago it was LeBron. 20 years before that it was Michael Jordan. Every single 20 years it seems like there's somebody that does that, and apparently that's what happens for the Spurs too. You got David Robinson in 89. You got Tim Duncan in 98, 97.
David and Tim were 87, 97, exactly 10 years ago.
Thank you. Yeah. But the difference is, though, is they came in and they contributed right away. They were in ready-made situations, right? I mean, David Robinson came in, I believe it was 89. They had a 50-win season that year. Timmy came in. They won a championship 2 years later. Those expectations that are being heaped on to Wembanyama to win 50 games this year with this team, what's the difference in those two things, in those three things?
Well, who expects it, right? I mean, I don't expect the Spurs to win 50 games. I think it's partly our job to manage those expectations too. If you think that Wembanyama is going to come in and win 50 games with this roster, no way. Now the Spurs, if you think back to David in 87, they were awful. They were 20-60, and they had Alvin Robertson, Frank Burkowski, and Peter Goodmanson and a bunch of guys like that. They made big trades. They brought in Mo Cheeks, who was an all-star point guard. They brought in Terry Cummings, who was an Eastern Conference all-star forward. They drafted Sean the same year in 89, in that David was 87, but he had to sit up for 2 years. Sean was the number 3 overall pick. So they had 2 instant rookie starters to go along with 2 veteran all-stars, plus Caldwell Jones and some other veterans that they assembled that team that summer. So I think we got to wait and see what the Spurs do this summer. Do they add a guy like Terry Cummings to help this kid? Or do they wait a couple of years when Wembanyama is going to be filled out a little more and not waste a lot of that draft capital right away?
Well, let's hear from Antonio Daniels, who you spoke with a little while ago. He was on the championship team, that first Spurs championship team, and played with Tim and saw everything kind of come together. So let's hear what he has to say about the differences between drafting Wemby now and drafting Timmy back in 97.
I think the biggest difference is the situation that Tim stepped into. And I think that's what's kind of gets lost here. You know, as you're moving within the city and people constantly asking me about Victor Wembanyama. And the question to me always is, do you think he'll bring us a championship this year or next year or the year after? And the thing that I don't think people understand is how difficult that is to do. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm saying it's hard to do. Tim stepped into a situation where David Robinson was here. Sean Elliott was here. You know, Avery Johnson was here.
Just a couple years removed from being an all-star.
Right.
David was still an all-star.
Correct. So what Victor Wembanyama is stepping into is a situation where the Spurs had to tear it down to build it back up. right? And when you tear something down, that means you have to start from ground zero. But I tell you what, if you're going to start from ground zero and have an opportunity to rebuild this storied organization from the memories and the way that a lot of us remember it, you got the right guy in Victor Wembanyama.
Chuck, is he on point?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not going to debate the guy with that many skins on the wall, and plus what a great guy Antonio Daniels is. You know, it's hard to know how the Spurs are going to pair this, right? Because I think the expectations are apt. I mean, he's coming in with a lot of hype. Just like when Zion came into the league, you feel like this is going to be the guy that changes the face of the franchise, right?
He's got other issues now.
But, yeah, and it's not fair to compare the two, obviously. I'm just talking about, you know, the 40,000-foot view of how the machine works to, you know, build some excitement going into a season. So, I mean, for me, I think the hardest thing to understand or to try to figure out is what do the Spurs really have, right? I mean, when they were playing everybody at the beginning of the year, they looked like a pretty competitive team that played well together. They had guys doing the right things. They had all these different things that looked like they might have a pretty decent team, at least a competitive one that you could put on the floor every night. Then you get a couple guys banged up, then you start resting guys, you start experimenting with the roster. I mean, obviously the Spurs are trying to figure out themselves, you know, who plays best with each other, which guy can really play, which guy can play in crunch time, all these different things. So, you know, maybe the first part of, if you bring Victor Wembanyama in, is trying to figure out, you know, how much of this are you going to have to just kind of let simmer a little bit, see exactly what you have before you start trying to bring in other pieces. You know, if it was me, I would do the slow build. If it was me, you know, I'd probably try to figure out how to get into maybe getting two of the top three guys. You know, I mean, if you could do that and have these guys paired together and let them grow up together, you know, I mean, because I think the league can be had right now. I mean, it is hard to win a championship, but I mean, you can make the argument over what we just saw this year. Maybe it's never been easier. I mean, it's hard to win right now, as last year proved, with superstars and a lot of them on a roster. You know, look who was left at the end. I mean, two teams that you never thought at the end of the season were going to be there, and yet they were, and then one won a championship. I mean, obviously, Joker's a superstar, but there's not a lot of those guys around him.
I kind of feel bad for Wemby a little bit because he's coming into a situation where he knows he's going to be the number one pick. He almost slipped up in an interview after his last game where he said he had to go back and forth from almost said San Antonio. But the elation that he's going to feel tomorrow when he walks across the stage, shakes hands with the commissioner, finally knows he's the number one pick. None of us know what that's like. Obviously, we've never been number one picks, never drafted. But Antonio does. Antonio talked a little bit about how he felt and how Wemby might feel when he walks across the stage tomorrow.
As a child, if this is something you dreamed about, so just take it out of the basketball realm and put it in any realm where you are minutes away from your dream coming true. You know, like that's a different feeling that a lot of people don't get an opportunity to really experience. And to be sitting in that dream room at the time with my mom and my grandparents who have passed on, my college coach, my best friend, Colin Bryant, my sisters, and then knowing that when that number 3 pick happened, who at the time was Chauncey Billups, right?
Yeah.
To Boston. And I knew I was going forward to Vancouver to realize, man, I am literally minutes away from my dreams coming true. Like getting an opportunity to do something I am passionate about and love doing. It honestly, Don, it's tough to really put into words.
So what do you think that pressure is going to be like? How long is that kind of elation for Wemby before he realizes, oh, this is like I have to go save the city now almost?
In listening to this kid, I don't think there's pressure with this guy. I think he's expecting this and has been expecting it his whole life. And, you know, from the time he was 9 years old, he was taller than the dads coaching his team when the other kids were 2'6". And again, he's been managed and trained and fully, he'd be disappointed if he wasn't the number one pick. And that goes back to 4 or 5 years ago. And I don't think he's coming into any better situation than in San Antonio, where Pop can manage those expectations. He's going to be joined by a lot of young guys. There's already like 4 other 19-year-olds on this team. So, he's got people around him. He's got Nike. He's got McDonald's. He's got all these people around him. He's been going through this superstardom in France for 2 years now. I don't know that he feels pressure.
But isn't there something to say, like, if there's been no one that's come into the league that's had this kind of pressure on him since LeBron, and LeBron arguably lived up to the expectations. If he ends up being someone that plays for 10 years and has a decent career, that's technically
but
a
I think
disappointment,
I think that's a couple years down the road if he's a bust. I don't think immediately. I think I think most people should know that there's going to be a process. Look, I kind of compared him to Giannis. Giannis came in, and it took him 4 or 5 years to go from 190 to 240 pounds and slowly become an all-star. And then, now look, he's hyped more than that. So I think a lot of people think he'll be an all-star in year 1. I don't know that I have that expectation for him. I think it's possible. But if they don't win right away, Jordan didn't win until year 7. LeBron didn't win until year 7 with all his hype.
Yeah, I mean, he made one that faced the Spurs in 2007. So
yeah.
I mean, they got swept, but
yeah, and I think Wemby, again, if you surround him with the right people, I think he's got a chance to make the Spurs competitors in year 3. I think.
So next year, when people are looking at the Spurs and they end up winning 35 games, they go 35-47 or whatever the math would be, and people are like, "Oh, he's disappointing already." What is that a successful season? 35 wins?
I don't think so. Chuck and I both agree with this. I think we watched this team absolutely shut games off in the fourth quarter that they could have won. There's a reason that you tank, and there's a reason they call it tanking. And I think Pop was pretty good at it. And I think they won 28 games. I think they were a 40-win team last year if they tried to win 40. I think they could have won 40.
It's interesting you say that. Sean Elliott, who we also spoke to last month, he said something similar to those along those lines. And he kind of commented on how he's going to mesh with Shohan and Keldon Johnson and all these guys. Plus, this team could have won more games last year. They just didn't. So let's hear from Sean.
He's the type of player that is going to fit anywhere he goes, be it a system or a type of offense where you run a lot of 4 down like we did with Timmy. He's going to fit in with any type of player because his ability, maybe his best ability is to make other people around him better. So I have no doubt that he's going to enhance the game of every single one of our guys. And so, like I said earlier, not only am I excited for the city, the organization, I'm excited for the guys that are going to play with him next year. When you look at our record, it's not really reflective of the way our guys played. Our guys played hard and they played the right way. There's one of my comments that I had with other commentators around the league. Pretty much at the end of every game, they'd look over to me and say, "Hey, that you guys don't look like a 15 and 45 or 15 and 55 team. You guys don't look that way. You guys play hard and you play the right way." And so it's a great reward for those guys.
Chuck, do you agree? I mean, were they a 40-win team last year if they stayed healthy and they tried to win?
Yeah, I mean, I think low end, right? I mean, how many games did they blow late, right? I mean, at one point, that was all we were talking about, right?
There was one game last year where they beat the Nuggets by like 40 or 30 or something like that. It was late in the season. They finally had everyone healthy, and they just trounced the Nuggets in Denver, I think it was.
And I don't think you can say this enough, and nobody likes talking about it, but it's true. You try to lose. They tried to lose games last year at times. Pop would, they would be up 12 going to the fourth, and they'd have guys and they'd pull them out with 8 minutes to go. And the guys look a little confused. Keldon Johnson played it better than anybody. Keldon Johnson would have to face the media after knowing that they intentionally lost a game and not say it publicly because they didn't want to be Mark Cuban and getting in trouble with the league. But I really do believe that there's an artistry to tanking, and I think they did it as well as anybody last year.
Yeah, you just manage the minutes differently, right? I mean, it was pretty fascinating to watch how they did this. And again, I think more fascinating that somehow, some way, the ping pong balls flew their way again. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense in the real world, right? That you could have lightning strike a third time. I mean, every day you shake your head. I mean, especially when you had a 26% chance of getting the sixth pick?
Yeah.
And then a weighted 14% to get the first pick. And yet, here we are, destiny arrives at their doorstep
as
again.
Soon as we saw Houston pop up at 5, I think we were all just like, or was it Detroit? One of those two teams at 5.
Yeah, once Detroit.
And we were all like, oh, okay, this might happen. Then Houston at 4.
And that's when Charlotte, I was watching it with Chuck, and I never let myself get there. Even when it was between them and Charlotte, I went, okay, Scoot Henderson, that's going to be a nice addition to this team. He's going to be really good. Like, he could be Dwayne Wade. He could be really good. And then, boom, Charlotte. And I was just like, no way.
I've never seen you happier in that moment.
I don't know if it was happiness as much as I was just shocked and joy.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
Yeah, happy for the city. You know what was interesting? They didn't win anything other than the right to Wembanyama, but the mood around town was the same as it was when 99, when Sprewell's shot was an air ball, and the same it was in 03 and 05 and 07 and 14. It was this feeling around the city. People were driving around with honking horns and stuff. It was like San Antonio as a city needed that after what they've been through the last 4 or 5 years.
Last couple of things I wanted to get to. Chuck, you mentioned it earlier. What are the chances that they draft or they go back into the top 5? They have so many assets over the next 5 years. They're going to take Wemby at 1. We all think. You got another couple of generational talents in the top 5, or not generational, but very good talents. Brandon Miller out of Alabama, Scoot Henderson playing in the G League last year. What do you guys think the chances are that they see, okay, we might not be the best team next year, but let's build with a couple of these guys together, let them mesh, kind of like Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic and Michael Porter Jr. did, and see kind of what Denver did. And they get back into the top 5, and they're like, all right, Scoot, Wemby, that's the future.
If it was me, that's exactly how I would do this, because the best thing, Matt, about rookies is rookie contracts. And so, we've seen how these contracts have kind of been the millstone around the neck of some of these teams as players get older. And, if they've already won, maybe they're not the same player. Maybe there's not the same energy or the same drive from some of these guys. And I'm not saying all of them, but to me, this would be best served. And if you could get not one, but 2 studs with all the draft prospects that they have, or, the draft collateral that they have right now in terms of future drafts. I mean, what is it? 8 first rounders in the next
13 in the next 6.
Yeah.
Not as many as the Jazz, but pretty close.
Right. But I mean, so, if you're willing to say, we're going to slow build this, and if we don't think we have a championship caliber team next year, we're going to have a competitive team next year. I think they will have a competitive team next year. But if there's an opportunity, again, it takes 2 teams to trade. And I'm sure the teams that have those picks are looking at this too and thinking, geez, if we do this, even if we have future picks, but again, every team's in a different situation. But I know how I would do it. I would do exactly like
and I think Keldon Johnson's a number that you could move, and a lot of teams would like to have a young Keldon Johnson on there, especially those teams that can afford the luxury tax. And that's another thing we got to consider is the rules are about to change dramatically, salary cap wise.
Mm-hmm. But isn't Keldon one of those players that, I mean, the feeling I get around town is that they'd like to keep Keldon.
Sure.
Especially fans.
No. I agree, but his contract is the most movable one.
Mm-hmm.
When especially they're really high on Malachi, and he's probably the one that gets the least amount of hype compared to Devin, Keldon, and the other younger guys like Wesley and Trey Jones. But they really like Malachi. They really like Devin. So those are your perimeter player, your wing players. They need a point guard, and they're always going to do something different than what we expect, right? I mean, Kawhi Leonard was a name no one had heard when they got him at 15. Josh Primo was a guy nobody had heard. at 12, and nobody in a million years thought Josh Primo was a guy on anybody's radar when he was close to more 19 and in the 20s. A name to watch out for is this Koulibaly guy who is Wemby's teammate in France. He's also 19, and he's slotted around top 10 pick, 7, 8, 9, 10. I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe traded into that range and paired these two French kids together. They're best friends. They love each other. And Koulibaly is a hell of an athlete, really, really talented.
Do you think that this isn't on the rundown, but I'm just curious, that Chris Paul would be a decent person to bring in? I mean, he's obviously, there's a bunch of rumors surrounding him, bunch of rumors and odds that he might come to San Antonio to help out with the development. For 2 years, Chris Paul put him on a team that's still building.
I don't think so. His money's too big. I don't think they want his money.
Chuck?
Yeah. Again, with some of these guys, all I see is corporations and brands. And, would he be the guy at this point in his career that you want as the leader of your locker room and teaching younger guys? Potentially. But, I mean, again, do you need somebody like this at this point? I mean, at 19, this kid's probably already dealt with more things and been exposed to things in a positive way that he's had to learn how to deal with. He's always been the center of attention, no pun intended. There's been so much heaped on him already. I just don't know that at this point, do you really need outside forces coming in and potentially those forces not meshing with the direction that this organization wants to go in? Right. I mean, I just don't know that they're in a position for that. And I don't know that you can say that the kid needs it at this point. I mean,
right.
He's done everything to this point. And obviously, even as a rookie in the NBA, he's going to struggle, you got to think. So how is he going to deal with that? How's he going to manage that? Do they need out other players? I mean, sure, but I would think Keldon Johnson would be a perfect guy in that scenario that could say, hey, man, this is just the way it is. And here's how I did this. And here's how I managed this. And obviously the expectations are going to be different. And maybe a guy like Chris Paul with his resume could fill in a couple of blanks. But again, I don't know. I would say you got to wait and see what you have before you start thinking about, okay,
bringing people in. Maybe next offseason.
Because maybe it's not even a superstar. Maybe it's just a guy that's, maybe it's just a player that's been around the league, that's been a grinder for 10 years. And
that's what I think.
Like a Jamal Crawford kind of type.
Like a PJ Tucker. Like an Al Horford. Just a grown-up who can give some muscle, because they have none other than Zach now that they got rid of Jakob. They need some muscle next to him, kind of like Terry Cummings was for David, and they need a point guard. But I think a guy like Chris Paul, the guys like Kevin Durant and James Harden, I put Paul in that category of guys who just suck all the energy out of the room because of their egos and their stature. Mm-hmm. I agree with Chuck that it's got to be more of just a solid old vet that, like a PJ Tucker, he's the one that pops in my head, who's just going to teach him about, this is what you do when you check into a hotel on the road.
It's the right way to do it.
Yeah, this is how you get to practice early. This is how you watch film, those kind of things.
All right, we can't talk Spurs without talking Pop. Last thing. Let's hear from Sean on how he thinks that Pop was reinvigorated, because the man is still not under contract technically right now.
I'm sure he's going to be invigorated, and his juices were really flowing last year, but he has a chance to teach another great player, and I'm sure he's going to make the most of it. And I'm excited for him. I'm excited for the coaching staff. I'm excited for anybody that gets to work with him, because he truly is one of a kind.
Don, you're our Spurs insider. What do you think is going to happen with Pop and his contract after Wemby's taken and all this stuff happens?
I think he coaches 3 more years, minimum. I think he was going to coach maybe 1. I know he's told people over the course of last season who've asked, and people seem to always want to ask, and he's a little offended by it. What am I going to do? Play golf? I hate golf. What am I going to do? Hang at the country club all day? And that's what he says. He likes doing this. He worked under Larry Brown, who's a teacher first. They like teaching the game, win or lose. He's the only guy who's got job security who can win 20 games for 4 years and not get fired. Monty Williams can't win 60 games and get fired. He's still got fired. He's got the system on cruise control. He's got a bunch of young kids doing his work for him. And he makes $12 million a year and flies and stays in Ritz-Carltons and drinks nice wine and has expense accounts. Who would give that up? Why would you retire? It's like Pat Sajak. Pat Sajak worked 4 days a week and made $15 million, 4 days a month, 4 days a month and make $15 million a year. Pop's not giving that up.
So 3-4 more years and then getting out of there, maybe one more championship run in 4 years.
I don't think championships really are the goal at this point. I think he'd like to put his imprint on this kid and teach him the right way to play and then hand him off to somebody else. I think the kid's potential gives them a chance to be contenders. I don't know if they win another championship in Pop's era, but I just think from him personally, he likes doing it too much to give it up now.
You got a lot of stuff to look forward to tomorrow as Wemby walks across that stage and Don looks up 2 feet above him, and there's
if he's available to us.
Right.
He's like Elvis and Beyonce. I don't know we're going to be able to get him one-on-one.
Shaq grew up here. You've interviewed Shaq hundreds of times, I'm sure. He's taller than Shaq.
Shaq's the biggest human being you've ever seen. This kid's skinny. I've seen Yao Ming.
But he's taller than Shaq.
He's taller than
you're going to
Shaq.
have to get on a crate or something.
But he was taller than Shaq. Yao Ming was taller than Shaq too, but Shaq, to me, was bigger than Yao Ming. So,
well, yeah, he played at 300.
I'm sure they'll have this kid. I'm sure this kid will be sitting down at a conference table, and we'll be standing, and we'll be about the same.
All right, good. I'll put you on my shoulders if we really need to get that shot.
Step ladder and boom mic.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. That's it for this edition of Sneakers and Cleats. Obviously heavy on the sneakers, not so much on the cleats in this episode. Remember to subscribe, rate, review. Let us know how we're doing. Maybe we'll read a few of them on the next episode. Who knows? If you give us a 5-star rating, read a few of them. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this. I know I did enjoy talking to my bosses. Hopefully they like the way this comes out too. So we'll see you guys next time.